Tonight on Ukraine Today, Zelensky meets Putin? Where, when, and is it even possible? Russian terror. Chilling new footage shows the aftermath of strikes on Odesa and Sumy regions. Sanctions are working. In just 6 months, the Russian state budget collapsed into a massive deficit. Orbán gate? Trump demanded explanations from the Hungarian Prime Minister. Why is he blocking Ukraine's path to the EU? All this and more, right now. Hi there, my name is Volodymyr Robchun. Hit subscribe, smash that like button. Let's dive into the news. Today we'll talk a lot about a possible meeting between Zelensky and Putin, but first, the main indicator of Russian intentions: the shelling of peaceful Ukrainian cities and towns. Chilling footage appeared after a Russian drone strike in the Odesa region. In Izmail, a massive fire broke out at a fuel and energy facility. At least one person was reported injured. In addition, the occupiers launched a massive attack on the Sumy region. Enemy drones struck residential areas in Ochtyrka. They are wounded, including children. An apartment building and private homes were damaged. Donetsk, Chernihiv, Kharkiv and Poltava regions were also hit. Now the factor that, along with financial pressure on Russia, may force Putin to sit at the table with Zelensky. I mean, battlefield losses. In the past 24 hours alone, Russia lost at least 920 soldiers killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that's already 1,072,700 troops. In just the last day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 1 Russian tank, 4 armored vehicles, 50 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy hardware. At the same time, the pace of recruiting new Russian contract soldiers has fallen to a 2-year low. Even money doesn't seem to motivate them anymore. Why is that? Let's see in our story.
Russians do not want to sign contracts with the occupying army. In the second quarter of 2025, the Russian Ministry of Defense signed the lowest number of contracts in the past 2 years.
The entire political structure and the underlying mythology for the Russians themselves has significantly changed over time. But this is absolutely and entirely logical because for several decades, the Russian populace was consistently fed the pervasive idea that their entire lives, their very existence and societal structure were meticulously built around actively opposing the decaying and morally corrupt West, and above all, the formidable United States of America. It was deeply ingrained that the entire geopolitical structure and strategic framework of the Putin regime was fundamentally based upon an unwavering and persistent confrontation with the United States. And now here is Putin happily flying to the States, meeting with President Trump, announcing that they have plenty to discuss, including the Arctic, possibly rare earth elements, issues of nuclear deterrence, and so on and so forth. And right before the eyes of, as Putin calls them, ordinary Russians, Russian propaganda makes a complete 180 turn.
The Russian publication Important Stories reports that the number of contract soldiers has decreased 2.5 times compared to the same period last year.
They're not just going to fight and die in Ukraine for, let's say, signing bonuses or contracts. Their wives and mothers are happy when they receive death benefits. Well, everyone has seen those videos where a mother by default was rejoicing. These are truly horrific scenes. That's it. But at the same time, people are also going to fight because that's how propaganda has fed and raised them.
Despite the decrease in the number of signed contracts, the Kremlin continues to lie about the real pace of replenishing the Russian army. For example, Deputy Chairman of the Russian Security Council Dmitry Medvedev claimed that in the first 6 months of 2025, supposedly 210,000 new contracts were signed. This figure is 1.6 times higher than the numbers derived from Russian budget expenditure data analyzed by journalists.
It should be noted that, according to the SVR, about a quarter of this number is what is called, as they say in Russia, the so-called special contingent among the contract soldiers. Who is included in this group? These are convicts, people who, for example, are accused of crimes and have made deals with the investigation. And into this concept of the special contingent, Russians also include the forced mobilization of citizens of other countries under various pretexts and motivations. Some are first promised jobs at military enterprises with lucrative contracts, while others, for example, in certain Central Asian countries, are immediately promised large sums of money, and people fall for it, so to speak. And in addition, they are also promised Russian citizenship, and some are promised housing.
Despite the decline in mobilization morale, Russians are still managing, albeit with difficulty, to compensate for losses at the front.
For Putin, by and large, it doesn't matter who is sent into the furnace of war to achieve his political goals and ambitions. Whether it's, as he calls them, ordinary Russians, or just some migrant workers, or people who are simply deceived and forced to put on a uniform and sent somewhere near Pokrovsk.
Previously, the Russian Federation was able to maintain a positive balance both through Russian contract soldiers and through the so-called special contingent, which made up to a third of all new recruits. After Putin's rapprochement with the United States, the very country Russians are supposedly fighting against in Ukraine, the propaganda paradigms in people's minds are beginning to dissipate. Not even the large signing bonuses paid for joining the Russian army can stop this.
And here's the factor I already mentioned: financial pressure. It works. In the first half of the year, the Russian state budget showed a record deficit of nearly 5 trillion rubles. What's next for Russia's economy and for ordinary Russians if Putin doesn't stop the war?
The war is costing the Kremlin a fortune. The Russian Federation's budget deficit for the first 7 months of 2025 amounted to $54 billion. This was written on his page by the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak.
Russia's budget today is a bubble. In July alone, the deficit reached a staggering $13 billion. From January to July, it reached $54 billion. This is more than the annual expectations. Expenses have increased by 28% year on year. Revenues only by 2.8%. You can pretend to be Sauron all you want, but when your economy is collapsing because of the war, you're just a sinful golem hiding your tattered pocket from the eyes of the world.
13 billion rubles is more than the annual expectations. The gap between revenues and expenses is simply catastrophic. Russian economists are also talking about the budget deficit. It's big, though not quite that big.
The situation is getting much worse than it was in 2023-2024. If in previous years, even though the authorities constantly missed their budget deficit targets, promising 1 trillion or 1.5 trillion rubles, but ending up with a budget hole of 3.5 trillion rubles, this year the situation has become truly grim. The war has been going on for 3.5 years now. There is a systematic destruction of the civilian sectors of the economy. Dozens of industries have become consistently unprofitable. There has been a sharp drop in oil and gas revenues, and now we see that just from January to July in the first 7 months of this year, the budget deficit has already exceeded the entire revised plan for the current year, 4.9 trillion rubles. And just for a moment, that's 4 times more than what the Ministry of Finance originally planned at the end of last year when they were approving the budget for the current year.
Back in the spring, The Economist reported that since the end of 2024, a sharp downturn has emerged in the Russian economy. The downturn came after a period when the Russian economy was showing growth, despite sanctions and the war. This was facilitated by generous budget injections, high commodity prices, and the militarization of the economy.
The high-frequency index calculated by Goldman Sachs shows that since the end of last year, Russia's annual GDP growth has dropped from about 5% to roughly 0. VEB, the Russian Development Bank, finds similar trends in its assessment of monthly growth. The business turnover indicator calculated by Sberbank, Russia's largest lender, has declined. The government, though more cautious, admits that something is happening. At the beginning of April, the central bank noted that recently a number of sectors have seen a decline in production due to a sharp drop in demand.
Despite the figures and expert opinions, Putin has his own view of the budget situation.
As for the federal budget, the situation here is stable.
A couple of weeks ago, he said that all Russians had paid for the war through a surge in prices and a budget deficit, and now he says we are going to reduce military spending. But in reality, we see that military spending is actually increasing by 25 to 30% year over year, and it will continue to grow next year. And accordingly, this means that this will be the 6th year of printing money. This will be a year of the harshest austerity, meaning Russians should prepare to tighten their belts, face unpopular decisions, and see an even more aggressive increase in all types of levies: monopoly tariffs, utilities, recycling fees, excises, duties, the failure of entire national projects, and cuts in spending on the population, the social sphere, healthcare, and education.
The situation is so stable that, according to the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine, in many regions of the Russian Federation, one-time payments to those who sign a contract with the Russian army have been almost halved.
Against the backdrop of a federal budget deficit and worsening financial problems, one-time payments for those who sign a contract with the army have been reduced in the following regions: in Bashkortostan, from 1 of 6 million rubles to 1 million; in the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug, from 3 and 1 million to 1.9 million. In the Belgorod region, payments have dropped from 3 million to just 800,000, and in the Nizhny Novgorod region, from 3 million to 1.5 million rubles.
In July, the EU introduced its 18th package of sanctions and lowered the price cap on Russian oil from $60 to approximately $47.6 per barrel. Because of this, according to Bloomberg, Russia's oil revenues fell by a third in the second month of summer. And although only the Kremlin knows the real state and deficit of the budget, it seems that the Russian economy is not far from default.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. And make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. And if you think it's worth it, share it too. Thanks. And now to the possible meeting between the Russian dictator and the Ukrainian president. According to German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, it could happen in the next 2 weeks. Here's how the scenario may develop.
Both are already in suits, smiling and ready to engage in constructive dialogue. Volodymyr Zelensky met with Donald Trump, marking a new stage in negotiations over the terms of peace in Ukraine. The key issues were the concessions that official Kyiv is prepared to make and what security guarantees Ukraine will receive in return, as well as when and under what conditions Zelensky might meet with Putin.
We are going to hold a meeting. I think if everything goes well today, we will have a trilateral meeting. And I think when a real chance appears, and I think then there will be a real chance to put an end to the war. It is never the end of the road. People are being killed and we want to stop it. I think we have a good chance to do that. It's been almost 4 years. I know the president, I know myself, and I believe that Vladimir Putin wants this to end.
That's why we need to stop this war, to stop Russia. And we need the support of our American and European partners. And we will do everything possible to achieve this. And we are ready for the trilateral format. As the president said, this is a good signal regarding the trilateral format.
But whether Putin is ready remains unclear. Earlier, Trump stated that such a meeting could take place on August 22nd. Now, however, German Chancellor Merkel has said that it will happen within the next 2 weeks. However, officially, Moscow is putting forward a whole series of unacceptable conditions, such as the withdrawal of the armed forces of Ukraine from 4 regions, the return of the Russian Orthodox Church, or the establishment of Russian as an official language in Ukraine.
There is absolutely no constructiveness here, nor any point where we could somehow find common ground. And that's why the meeting, whether it takes place in 2 weeks or even tomorrow, will simply consist of both sides laying out their vision, their respective red lines. And then the question is, what will come of it, right? How will this convergence happen? What will make it possible? That's the main question.
Another issue where Ukraine and Russia have not yet managed to find common ground is the deployment of a foreign contingent here as a security guarantee.
Trump has spoken about this, as have some representatives of the White House. There is also discussion about including Chinese troops in this contingent. And if China agrees to this, meaning if China is present, if its troops are there and it does have certain interests here as well, then it will be much harder for Russia to maneuver and keep saying no to such proposals.
It's also unclear what power such peacekeepers would be given if a decision is actually made. Speaking about the contingent, French President Emmanuel Macron stated that it would consist of several thousand European soldiers who would not provide significant military reinforcement to the Ukrainian armed forces and would rather serve as a political signal that the world is not abandoning Ukraine.
Undoubtedly, a mere observer mission would be a weak option, since we've already had such precedents starting from 2014. The most preferable option, of course, is one where there are appropriate forces, properly armed, with a mandate to stop and prevent any acts of aggression, both current and future, and which would be stationed directly along the line of contact.
Meanwhile, Ukraine itself decided to add some specifics regarding its own security guarantees, listing figures and the names of American weapons that will help make peace truly lasting, not just until Russia once again stockpiles missiles and new mercenaries.
The Ukrainians, as part of increasing their security guarantees, have requested to purchase $100 billion worth of weapons. It is clear that Europe will be the one paying for this, possibly partially Ukraine itself, but I think mostly Europe. But when we're talking about such an impressive sum, it means enormous quantities of weapons. This means that in Ukraine, they understand that nothing but the Ukrainian army can guarantee the security of this state. So accordingly, it's necessary to purchase American weapons, which, by the way, have proven themselves quite well in this war.
At the same time, the Russian Foreign Ministry continues to make harsh statements about the militarization of Ukraine, as well as the inadmissibility of foreign troops being stationed here, somehow forgetting that they themselves have thousands of North Koreans in the ranks of their armed forces. Europe, meanwhile, no longer reacts to these Kremlin tantrums, clearly stating the troops will be deployed. And for perhaps the first time, they are saying outright that this is necessary not only for Kyiv, but for all European countries.
Peace must be achieved through strength. We must have reliable security guarantees to protect both Ukraine and the vital security interests of Europe. Ukraine must be able to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And there should be no restrictions on the Ukrainian armed forces, whether it concerns cooperation with other countries or assistance from third countries. No restrictions for the Ukrainian armed forces. As I have said many times before, Ukraine must become a steel porcupine, indigestible for potential invaders. The coalition of the willing, including the European Union, is ready to do its part.
The main question that concerns all Ukrainians, territorial concessions, was discussed, but not resolved. Zelensky once again stated that he is not ready to give up Donbas, and he clarified to the Americans the true scale of Putin's demands by showing a map of the current line of demarcation. To make it even clearer, Friedrich Merz emphasized that a possible Ukrainian renunciation of Donbas would be comparable in scale to the United States giving up the territory of Florida. The comment to the press on this matter was brief. When Putin is ready to meet, then we will discuss mutual concessions.
The complex and sensitive question of territory, a matter of significant international concern, is an issue that we will definitively leave to be resolved exclusively between myself and President Putin.
As the American leader shared on his social network Truth Social, US Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Special Envoy Stephen Witkoff will now be responsible for preparing a meeting between Putin and Zelensky at a location to be determined later. Among the possible options, the White House is considering Hungary.
In the end, both Zelensky and Trump were satisfied, and the US president stated that within the next 1 or 2 weeks, it would become clear whether a peaceful resolution is possible. Now everyone is waiting for Putin's response.
Personally, I doubt these talks will take place, especially if it's true, as France Press reports, that during his phone call with President Trump, Putin suggested holding the meeting with Zelensky in Moscow. Moscow. Definitely not. So where then? Switzerland says it is ready to host peace talks and even promises Putin immunity from arrest on the International Criminal Court warrant. That idea came from Swiss Foreign Minister Ignacio Cassis, who stressed that Switzerland has deep experience in diplomacy and can arrange such a meeting quickly. Sky News reports that other options include Rome, Budapest and Doha.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Meanwhile, European allies insist that security guarantees must be in place before any Zelensky-Putin meeting. Around 10 countries are ready to send their troops to Ukraine. That's according to Bloomberg. The agency writes that European leaders are actively using Trump's official support to prepare security guarantees for Ukraine. A plan involving British and French deterrence forces may be agreed in the coming days. NATO military representatives are gathering today to discuss Russia's war and the alliance's next steps. Reuters says the meeting will build on the outcome of the recent Alaska summit between Trump and Putin. To understand how Russia itself reacts to the idea of their almighty leader meeting President Zelensky, let's hear what Russian propagandists are saying.
This week, news from Russia is once again breaking records for absurdity. From cardboard anti-drones and hazel trees that speed up summits, to mothers being advised to send their sons to the front and entire battalions of censors reviewing every film in the country. It seems that ordinary life has somehow lost touch with reality. So let's go through it step by step. The other day, television came up with an unexpected explanation for why the Trump-Putin meeting was organized so quickly. It turns out it's all because of hazel trees.
I'll explain why the summit started so quickly. Because there was a meeting between the two presidents at Valdai, Lukashenko and Putin, where in an informal manner it was mentioned that the hazel tree has been put on combat duty and mass production has begun.
Meanwhile, across the internet, Russian mothers are now persuading the children of immigrants to take a risk, as they should, and join the army.
You're just scared. You're just being a coward. You're just ashamed to put on the uniform and serve for 1 year. No one is killing you, but you're killing your own family. You're killing your mother, who works alone on all fronts. And you know yourself that you're a coward.
Mom, I'm not a coward.
You just won't admit it.
Mom, I'm not a coward.
The arguments are ironclad. It's better to be heroically dead than, God forbid, alive somewhere in Europe. And even worse, a liberal. War correspondent Kurtz brought a fresh note to the concept of living a new life. He says Russians should get used to airport collapses, communication breakdowns, and reduced rights. The argument is simple. There's a war going on.
So I go to the airport and I already know my flight will be delayed. That's it. That's just the reality. Let's get used to it. There's a war going on. Let's understand that there are certain restrictions on our rights that we have to accept.
The so-called Alko deputy Gurulyov announced that it's time for Russian soldiers to grab their greatcoats and get ready to return home. Supposedly the war is about to end. Didn't make it to the special military operation will regret it.
The capitulation will be accepted in Alaska. Grab your greatcoat, we're going home. Congratulations to everyone on the victory. Soon all the heroes will be home, and those who didn't make it to the special military operation will be kicking themselves. I am proud of our warriors. They have earned a rest and a worthy place in peaceful life. Many will become deputies and government officials, wishing everyone peace and kindness.
Crimean teachers have crafted the Trench 25 device, which supposedly brings down drones with the sound of ringing bells.
With a distinct ringing sound that supposedly jams all drones and their signals.
Everything seemed serious until it turned out to be a prank by Belarusian performance artist Vladislav Bokan. The manuals that the teachers used were fake.
We are going to hold a masterclass on making the ACOP 25 device. You all know that we are currently living through a difficult time for our country, and the ACOP 25 is an acoustic bell-shaped defensive device, model of the year 25. It is a simple device designed to create a directed sound.
In Russia, they are preparing an entire battalion of censors who will have to review every film ever shown in the country. The task is to check them for compliance with traditional values and to identify any prohibited topics.
Imagine a person spends the whole day watching. It's their work day. Every day they watch you can't imagine. It's a huge number of films, documentaries, feature films, TV series of all genres. So that's why it's a tough job, even though people joke about it a lot. But once again, I want to say that if you just imagine the work these people do, you have to understand that it's really not an easy subject. So we agreed that we would hold several working meetings and roundtables where we would create a document that could specifically help these people navigate, let's say, the opposites of our values. For example, what constitutes propaganda that denies things like humanism, productive work, a strong family, and so on.
Just picture this, an entire army of people sitting around at the state's expense, carefully studying old movies and deciding what can be banned. It's hard to understand how Russians relate to one another, but it's possible. The war is somewhere out there, for example, in Belgorod. Those who were unlucky enough to be born there have to heroically defend the borders.
I need to switch to the left lane. And there's a man in some tiny car, like a Matiz or something, I don't know, and he rolls down his window. So I act all tough, like, what? Now I'm going to explain to him that I need to turn left. And you know what he says to me? Quote, "Why the hell did you even come here? It's already crowded without you. You should have stayed in your Belgorod and defended the borders." Are you all out of your minds?
Trump demanded explanations from Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Why is he blocking Ukraine's EU accession talks? According to Bloomberg, the US president called Orbán after his meeting with European leaders in Washington. The Hungarian Putin fan hasn't publicly commented on the call. It will be interesting to hear how he tries to justify himself. And finally, after the terrorist state Russia is defeated and Ukraine restored full control of its territory, we'll need to protect our borders so the invaders never walk in again. We can look at the West for experience. US Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem shared her view on how to do it.
Remember that a nation without borders is no nation at all. And we're so thankful that we have a president that understands that and understands that a secure border is important to our country's future. Now, if you look at the structure that's behind me, it's tall, which makes it very, very difficult to climb, almost impossible. It also goes deep into the ground, which would make it very difficult, if not impossible, to dig under. And today, we are also going to be painting it black. That is specifically at the request of the president, who understands that in the hot temperatures down here, when something is painted black, it gets even warmer, and it will make it even harder for people to climb. So we are going to be painting the entire southern border wall black to make sure that we encourage individuals to not come into our country illegally.
Okay, so the idea is clear. A high structure going deep underground, painted black. I'm sure such a wall will stop the invaders. Everything else, just details. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.